welcome to the Eye for an Eye podcast, where we discuss idioms, cliches, and phrases that we want you to post into your memory bank or in your brain so that they can come out at moments you need it. That's the reason for this. Our grandparents, our parents, or whomever, you consider a mentor, they always give you these words of wisdom. So we want to use this time to give you other words of wisdom that you may not otherwise get. We're going to talk about different phrases. We're going to talk about the history of them. We're going to talk about where they come from. We're going to talk about how they were maybe applied back in the past and how that application has evolved to today. So I'm ready. Brooke, you ready?
I'm ready. Let's do it.
Already. Today's topic, we're going to discuss the idiom of beat around the bush. Now, I'm sure everybody has heard it, but before we begin, let me give you a little background on this particular phrase or idiom, all right? Beat around the bush, as it's currently used, it means to avoid getting to the point. Often by being deliberately vague or indirect, especially when you're dealing with uncomfortable topics. Just a little historical data for you. This began, or the origin of this began in England in the 15th century. Now, originally when this particular phrase was used, this is what it literally meant. Hunters would beat around bushes to flush out animals while avoiding direct danger. So what would happen is they would go to bushes, maybe in a hunt, and they would use their dogs, or they themselves would, maybe take their rifles or their weapons, and they would beat around the bush to ensure that there were maybe no dangerous birds, maybe no dangerous cats, or maybe foxes or anything like that, anything that could attack them while they're trying to be discreet or while they're just traveling to ensure safety. All right. The first time that it was actually used was found to be in medieval poetry around Generatus, which is about 1440. So think about that. Now the evolution of it becomes a literal hunt. Well, it evolved from a literal hunting method to what we now know as a metaphor to avoid direct speech. Now, yeah, interesting, huh? Sometimes we hear these things and we have no idea where they come from or who invented it. And what I want people to do is I want them to start becoming more and more educated about the words that come out of their mouth. Because, knowledge is power. And believe it or not, the most powerful tool we have is, in fact, our mouths. So, Brooklyn, do you use this phrase? And do you use it in the same way that it's traditionally used?
I've definitely used the phrase beating around the bush because I think in polite society, people just do it so often, right?
Yep.
And as we get older, I think that we all want to be more like, there are good and bad traits that you learn or you see growing up. But something I've always admired from a young age is like seeing someone like my grandparents, my two sets of grandparents. As you get older and older, I feel like in good ways and bad ways, your tolerance decreases. So when I think somebody like my maternal grandfather, he would definitely always tell the 100% truth, the unvarnished truth, right? And he would always, and I always looked at it from like a purity standpoint. Like, I can't remember my whole life this man ever lying to me, or this man ever lying to anyone, or being indirect with anyone. Because beating around the bush is essentially being indirect, right?
True.
You don't want to step on toes, but he was never mean or short, but it was to the point. And I think when you're not getting to the point, right? It's the person who calls you and talks to you for an hour and they really just wanted to try to borrow $1,000, right? They're beating around the bush. You never
by giving you their story, right?
You never call me. Or as our boy T-Dog used to say, paint me a cloudy day, right? Paint me a cloudy day. So
Shout out to T-Dog.
shout out to T-Dog. So beating around the bush is being indirect. And, we're Marines. And so beating around the bush it's not possible in wartime, or it's not possible if you've got to do something right now, right? If you need something fixed or you need assistance, you can't beat around the bush. We need this. We need to do this right now. And so in that way, beating around the bush is usually, not all the time, but usually disingenuous, right? Because you didn't, if you need somebody to take you to the airport, right? First of all, it's better to call someone who you've taken to the airport, right? Or who you've done stuff for and they've done stuff for you. But, failing that, sometimes you end up calling, or sometimes a person would end up calling someone to drive them to the airport that they haven't been in contact with, which is weird. I mean, I'll just go and park and pay. I was telling some colleagues this the other day, I love to pay for parking. And everybody hates to pay for parking, but I want to leave when I want to leave. So I'd rather pay for parking, and then I can just get my car and get out of there. But yeah, that's what I think about beating around the bush. I think it usually doesn't serve a good purpose. It usually delays whatever needs to happen. And it usually is not from it. There are exceptions that maybe you'll note when you start speaking, but beating around the bush to me has never been advantageous for either party, right? Because if you need me to take you to the airport, then I need you to tell me as soon as you know, so that I can make arrangements to take you, right?
Right.
And if you need me to take you, then the quicker I find out, the better for both of us, right? Because if you waste an hour, then I'll be like, well, I also have to do this other thing. If you'd have told me an hour ago, I could have done both, but you robbed me of that capability, and now neither of us are going to get what we want.
That's understandable.
What's your interpretation?
One thing I do want to push back on you, not that I disagree totally, because I can definitely understand your point of view. One statement you made, you said that as the older we get, the more direct we become. And I found that in my life, the older that I get, the more patient I become, the more tactful I become, and I do.
Oh no, I was just speaking about my grandparents, how they took much less. They were much more direct the older they got. And I always said, I can't wait to get there. So I was just speaking from personal experience, not that everybody does that when they get older.
Right. Well, I think that with all of these things that we talk about, everything is subjective, but generally speaking, usually I have seen it in my own experience where it seems like our elders do become more and more direct, and they speak straight from their mind. But I think, honestly, it's from a practice of actually not being tactful or learning the balance or the art of beating around the bush. And we're going to get into that balance, or that, finding that balance a little bit later. Did you know that in some cultures, believe it or not, that directness is considered rude? That if you say things how they actually are, it's considered rude. For instance, Japan, China, and Korea. In those places, just saying things raw and how you feel is actually considered rude. Other places in like Latin America and the Middle East, as you can imagine, that if you just say, hey, I don't like this, it might be a jump off of a fight or something like that, because they don't usually take it like that. So
I'm glad you said that. I'm gonna write a note so we can revisit that. But continue.
No, yeah. So just moving forward, just so we can provide a little bit of balance, because in the end, it's going to be up to the individual person. It's going to be a decision to that particular person. But it's important that you understand where it's coming from, so that you can continue to build upon that. Another question. Why would a person actually avoid being direct, bruh?
They would avoid it for the reasons you stated, as in, I mean, for instance, because either with them personally, through some introversion or through their own personal culture, they would consider it rude to be direct. And many cultures are like that. And when I was doing, when I was doing my master's program in aeronautical science years ago, we studied a lot of
humble brag.
We studied a lot of aerospace accidents, and the international, for those who aren't familiar with aviation, the international language of aviation is English. So no matter where you're flying in the world, and you're talking to an air traffic controller, and you're Russian, you're Japanese, you're Korean, you're from Colombia, whatever, it's still an extra burden you have on top of the hundreds, the thousands of hours that it takes to become a pilot, especially a commercial pilot. You also have to know English, especially if you're flying, it's internationally. So what happened was there were a lot of airline crashes in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s in large Korean and Japanese airlines. And when they reviewed the flight recorders, culture was to blame for the accidents. This is what I mean. You and I are flying from New York to California, right? And you and I are Americans. So back in those days, they'd have pilots and they'd have navigators. You're my navigator. You'd say, Brooklyn, or you'd say, Captain. We have
Captain Brooklyn
clouds. We have, you're flying directly into the storm, and you should go 45 degrees, west and go around it. But in the flight recordings before crashes of the Japanese and Koreans, they would say things like, well, first of all, like the Koreans, for example, you had to, how in, you watch a lot of sports, like in NFL, NBA, whatever, the rookie has to buy dinner, do laundry, carry, like rookies.
Soft form of hazing. Yeah.
Right. So it was super big in Japan and Korea, where if you're the first officer, you're paying for dinners, you're carrying back, like you're doing a lot of stuff, and you would never interrupt or talk down to or even suggest things to the pilot. So what you have is, for instance, and it happened, your captain flying toward a mountain or flying into a storm, and you have the co-pilot and the navigator saying things like, sir, the weather radar has been helpful to us in the past, instead of, Captain, we've got to turn because we're going right, you're flying us right into this storm. And they would just suggest, you would read 20 minutes of them suggesting, trying to hint at, that we should take some action. But because of his status, the captain is king and he doesn't even hear them, right? Mm-hmm. So, but we would be more forceful as Americans. We'd say, Captain, we're going to have to take evasive maneuvers. We're going to have to do this. We have to do this. That would be completely rude in Korean or Japanese culture. So after a bunch of crashes, they flew Americans over there and they trained them, and they're like, listen, in the sky, there's no king. Just like, remember when we were in the Marine Corps and we'd be on ship and they'd be like, listen, whether you're the admiral or an ensign or a seaman first class or a petty officer, you have the right to stop this whole evolution and stop these millions of dollars worth of airplanes on the carrier deck, because safety is first, right? Mm-hmm. And that's something that had to be instilled in the Navy and Marine Corps culture, and it had to be instilled in worldwide cultures where the culture is, hey, you don't interrupt the sheik, you don't interrupt the king, you don't interrupt the the pilot, the captain. And so there are places where culture can be a detriment, right? Because there are certain things like, there's certain things in life where survival depends on doing the right thing at the right time. But, the indirectness can hurt you. And sure, if there are low stakes and you want to be indirect about something else, you don't like somebody's cooking at Thanksgiving and you just, you don't want to eat their macaroni and cheese or something, that's low stakes. I mean, it might be high stakes in some households, or if an aunt or something gets mad, but there are times when beating around the bush is deadly.
Yeah, I just remember the time when I was growing up, people used to always say, if an elderly person saw a baby and they thought it was ugly, they would say something like, "Bless his heart," So I find it funny that people, the lesson that I learned that there's a time and a place for everything. But, with everyone, before you say something, there's a couple of things that I think people should really think about. We should try to be self-reflective really quick, because the question becomes, if you feel the need to not answer a question directly or to make a statement correctly, you have to ask yourself these three things. Why am I avoiding directness? Is it fear? Do you think this person is going to do something to you? Is it, you worry that they'll be offended? Is it insecurity? Maybe I'm not as confident in what I got to say, or maybe I'm not as confident in myself to be able to elaborate beyond just making the statement if that person maybe doesn't understand. And another thing is, people need to ask themselves, am I having unclear thoughts? Maybe I thought about one aspect of it, but maybe I hadn't thought it all the way through, because, a lot of times in our culture, people just like to just blurt out stuff as it comes to. And we really don't take the time, to learn how to maybe say things in a less heavy way, because there's always situations where, as we used to say back in the day, it doesn't pay to be heavy-handed with your words. And I want to kind of move on to talk about that in particular. What would you think are some situations where maybe beating around the bush, or not beating around the bush, I don't even know what a bush is, but beating around the bush could bring about a favorable outcome as opposed to an unfavorable?
Well, you tell me.
Okay.
Where do you think beating around the bush is helpful?
In sensitive situations. For instance, let's say a person comes to you and they say, "Hey, look, my uncle died of lung cancer, and that he's a smoker." I don't think it would be wise in that particular instance to say, "Well, hey, you knew he did smoke." It was only a matter of time. Believe it or not, there are people out there that actually talk like that they have absolutely.
Those people are rude. I mean, that's not tactful at all, and that's insensitive. When someone just died, yeah, for sure, that's extreme.
Well, it's not.
Maybe it's not extreme, because
extreme
some people
or
really do act
uncommon
like that.
Some people really do believe.
Some people do really.
They believe that unadulterated, unaltered truth is the best course of action, no matter what. Some people out there do.
I'm going to push back, Mo, because I feel like what they're doing in that instance is not unadulterated truth, right? Because there's a difference between being honest and being hurtful, right?
Do you really think that everybody when they say something like that, they're really trying to be hurtful though?
This is why I say that, right? Let's give a scenario I think actually the scenario you gave is sufficient. Someone is giving you news. Their loved one died of this particular kind of cancer, right?
Mm-hmm.
And lung cancer. And some people never picked up a cigarette and got lung cancer. Other people chain smoked since they were 10 years old, right? And so you happen to know that this person's loved one has chain smoked since they were young. And they smoked so much, and you saw them smoke so much, that it's almost surprising they lasted this long, right?
Mm-hmm.
Even knowing that, you always have the opportunity to shut the hell up. So if you say, I'm sorry your loved one died, my condolences, if there's anything I can do for you, that's one way to go about it. But if you're like, your cousin Larry? I've known Larry since 1984, and Larry smoked every time I seen him since 1984. You are being hurtful, right? You're not helping, and it's a sign of either low vibration or low emotional intelligence. If in that moment you're gonna bring up when this person is hurting and just sharing something with you, I think people do know. But there are people who are I told you so's, and they're like, of course he died of lung cancer. You know how much Larry smoked?
Mm-hmm.
Who are they helping? You're not helping. You're not giving condolences. You're not offering a hug. You're saying, of course, and I could be in the minority. I could be wrong, but I feel like you are being mean. The people who kick you while you're down, they are being mean, right? But there are those people who will do that in every circumstance regarding everything, and they will twist that knife and they will kick you when you're down. But that's
so maybe the goal isn't necessarily what you say, but really to know your audience. That if you're going to say something like that, make sure it's with somebody that may not feel a particular way. Let me give you another example of the same situation. The reason why I brought up that situation, because that actually happened to me. It was somebody that I worked with back in the day. And you and I both know them. I don't want to bring up their name or anything, but their mom died. And I remember, telling him, hey man, I'm sorry to hear that. And he was like, hey, it's cool. She's been a chain smoker all my life. It was bound to happen someday. I'm taking a comforting posture, you know what I mean? Trying to let them know that, hey, look, man, that's not easy for anybody. And he was more or less acting as though he was just like, hey, I'm just being a realist. It is what it is. And he didn't sound like he was being overly critical. He didn't sound like he was being mean or that he, kind of was just like, screw my mom. He just kind of was just like, hey, this is just the reality of the situation, and I was prepared for it, and I'm good with it. And now me, being the person that I am, kind of has a soft heart for other people's pain, I actually tried to correct him on it. I'm like, nah, man, don't talk like that. That's just not nice. That's just not fair, But he was like, hey, man, it's okay. It is what it is. I don't mind it at all. And I was taken aback by that, because most of us kind of revere our mothers, to a certain extent. And that was the first time I had ever been exposed to that level of directness or that level of truthfulness. And I didn't quite know back then how to take that. And ever since then, I realized that, for a person like me, because, when I was younger, y'all used to call me Mopac. And it was mostly due to maybe my shorter fuse, or maybe I would just say something that was maybe quote unquote brutally honest. And I look back on it now and I'm like, man, that was really hurtful. And I find myself apologizing to myself now. I'm still not totally soft with words, but I've learned to, try to create a balance, man. But I want to kind of move this conversation with a couple of questions that makes me think. We already understand that culture is one way that it affects. our directness. Well, you kind of alluded to it earlier, but I just kind of want you to expand on it as best as you can. If you just want to keep it right where it's at, that's cool. Do you consider being direct a strength?
I think that you can use a sword as a weapon or as a tool.
Okay.
At war, your sword is a weapon.
Mm-hmm.
You stab the enemy, you slice the enemy, you poke the enemy, you cut off the enemy's head. But in peacetime, you can use that same sword and till the soil, and because as they say, it's better to be a warrior in a garden than a gardener suddenly finding themselves in the middle of a war, right? So directness needs to be intelligently applied, right?
Intelligently applied, I like that.
And I say that because you find yourself outnumbered 20-1. The fact may be that you don't like the leader of the other group, but there are 20 of them. So, you can be direct and tell that person who has 19 friends with them, I don't like you, I never liked you, I didn't like you in high school, I didn't like you when we were in the Marine Corps, I didn't like you when we happened to work together at the same place. I've always felt like if I had the opportunity, I would beat you up. You could say that, right? Because that could be 100% true, right? And but that's when keeping it real goes wrong.
Hell yeah.
You could say that, right? I remember once hearing about a person that I know who was working somewhere and looked the owner of the company in the face and said, "Look, I'm smarter than you."
Man,
and so
that's bold.
That's bold, and that may, I'm smarter than you, I'm better at this than you, right? Mm-hmm. That may literally be true, but many people have messed themselves up with the truth. So that level of directness, well, first of all, it's what we spoke about earlier. It's rude, right?
Yeah.
As time goes on, you find things out. Steve Jobs himself never did not design the iPad or the iPod or the iPhone. He said, listen, I want all the music you can fit in this thing. We're gonna call it the iPod. I want a computer, a phone, and everything else in the world. I want a laptop that you can hold in your hand, and we're going to call it the iPhone. And he had a bunch of engineers and designers and whatever put that together. But for the public view, it seems like Steve Jobs did this stuff, right? So for you to be one of the engineers, you're literally better at that computer stuff than him, but you're like, I'm smarter than you. It's like, you know what? You are. That's why I hired you. But 100 other people are smarter than me here as well, except they still have a job and I just fired you. You know what I'm saying? Because you want to try to disrespect me. And so we have to have, I've always said people are animals with driver's licenses, right? And so because of that, in order to survive as social animals, we have to do things. I don't know if we always have to beat around the bush, but I think that we definitely have to use emotional intelligence and tact, right? The deeper we get into this conversation, the more it's like, but I stop short of feeling like those things are beating around the bush. To me, beating around the bush is my earlier example where and it happens to all of us. I think it happens to everybody within the sound of my voice because, you and I talk to each other. There are people that you talk to all the time. There are people who, when your phone rings and you see that it's them and you're like, oh, something must be going on. If this you know what I'm saying? If this person is calling me, something is going on. And depending on the person, the something is they need something. They need something from you.
Yeah. Right? You know what? When I think of all of this, I think of one word always comes to mind, and that's discretion. You know, I'm a married man. And there are times, and I'm sure if you ask my wife, she'll probably say the same thing. There are times when you really want to give that person you know, that you're with the brutal honesty for their own benefit. But because you know how it could be perceived in the moment, you try to avoid it. So you try to find another set of words to say. And I think it's incumbent upon all of us, and it's important to all of us, that each and every one of us utilize discretion with our tongue. And if you learn to use discretion, you know, I remember one time when I was in therapy, I was talking about this problem that I have of being blunt and just saying things as they come. One thing my therapist always told me is if you think it, take a quick 2 count. Just say 1, 1,000, 2, 1,000. And usually within that short amount of time, if I'm feeling myself getting hype and I'm about to say something that Mopac would say, usually it gets calmed down, and that rage in me or that burst of energy that surges in me calms down, and then I usually tend to lean a little bit more towards my intellectual side and try to find another means of saying the same thing, but still getting the same effect. I think we have to practice. We have to continue to practice both. We have to kind of practice to figure out where the line is for us. You know, sometimes it ain't even what you say, it's how you say it, but that's a subject for a whole nother conversation, because we can go down that road forever. But we're about to close it up here in a minute, and I just wanted to begin the conversation. Ladies and gentlemen, if you're watching this video, we want to get your opinion. We want you to put it in the comments. We want you to talk about it. We want you to, you know, reach out to us and let us know your opinions on this particular thing, which is beating around the bush. Is it good? Is it bad? Is it helpful? Is it not? We kind of want to hear your idea on it. And before I leave, I want to say one last thing. Mastering both directness and discretion is the key. We can't always avoid the bush, but we know when walking around it leads to wisdom most of the time. And that's the key to this entire podcast. That's the key to everything, is providing wisdom. All right? So look, nice quick conversation for the both of us. You know, I appreciate your input. I definitely am going to take a lot of it into consideration. One thing I didn't know until recently was that in different places, directness is actually considered rude. I always thought that it was you ever heard somebody call somebody the salt of the earth? I always felt like that was an aspect of a person who's considered the salt of the earth type of person, that we're kind of raw, you know, and we provide, you know, flavor and we add to. Not really realizing that it can be a detraction until later on as I was doing my research on it. So I am Mo Riley, aka Mr. Act Like It.
I am Brooklyn Taylor.
And this is the Eye for an Eye podcast. We can't wait to hear your comments. We appreciate your time. Holler at us. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And all of you, by all means, have as best a day as you possibly can. All right, Brooke. Holler at you soon, man. No doubt. Peace. 1.